Good afternoon, and welcome to the Fall 2017 Rikard Lecture. I am Lynn Goody, the Mac A. Rikard Chair of Business and Economics, and it is my pleasure to serve as the host for this event. The Rikard Lecture Series, established in 1991, is named after Mac Rikard, a 1937 Oglethorpe alumnus, honorary degree recipient, Athletic Hall of Fame member, and trustee emeritus. The lecture series is overseen by a committee of faculty and staff, including Dr. Seema Shrikande, Dr. Peter Cower, and Ms. Barb Henry. Mr. Rikard, who passed away in 1996, was the former president of Allied Products Company and a supporter of Oglethorpe athletics and student scholarships. Because of Mr. Rikard's generosity to the university, we are able to provide lectures introducing students to current issues in business presented by leaders in their fields. Today, we are honored to have several Rikard family members in attendance. I would like to recognize and thank the family for their continued support of the business and economics programs at Oglethorpe. We have Mr. Frank Rikard and his wife, Jenny. Mr. Glenn Rikard and his wife, Suzanne. And probably, most importantly, their daughter, an Oglethorpe studio art major, Rebecca. Welcome. Our featured speaker today is Mr. William Hammack, a 1973 graduate of Oglethorpe University's business program. Go business. For all of you who drove to today's lecture, you likely traveled on a road constructed by C.W. Mathews, the state's largest highway construction company. While a student at Oglethorpe, Mr. Hammack worked at C.W. Mathews in the accounting department and soon became its controller. From there, his career would continue as a vice president and treasurer, later becoming the senior vice president of operations in 1982, executive vice president and chief operating officer in 1990, and ultimately serving as its president and CEO until 2014. For over 20 years, Mr. Hammack directed the C.W. Mathews senior management team and grew the company to be the most recognized leader in heavy highway construction. I speak on behalf of all Atlanta Metro drivers when I say thank you to Mr. Hammack for earlier this year leading the $159 million I-85 overpass reconstruction project on budget and 3 months early. Mr. Hammack continues to serve on C.W. Mathews' board of directors and is active in many philanthropic endeavors throughout the state of Georgia. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce today's Rikard speaker, a former member of the Oglethorpe Board of Trustees and a great friend of the university, Mr. Bill Hammack.
Thank you. I brought my hard hat because there's a rumor this is a really tough crowd, so yeah, this is kind of like my security blanket. I really wish we could just plug this hard hat in and let it talk for me. It is an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with the Rikard family and be part of this presentation. When I was asked to speak at this event, it was an easy answer for me for two reasons. First, I believe in the power of young people. All my career, I've mentored young people through the company, and it's a real joy in my life to see how they've developed and become senior management and achieve their goals in life. And I think you guys are awesome. I respect your energy, your enthusiasm, your intellect, and your inclusiveness. And that's what this world needs. So we're counting on you. The second reason I agreed to speak here today, I believe in this university. I think it's a great university with a great administration, great faculty, and there's tremendous power to a liberal arts education regardless of your major. You'll be prepared to go out there and face your life's goals. So having said that, and having dropped my microphone, I had a problem. immediately, and I was having this conversation with myself, which I do all the time. When you get old, you talk to yourself. I said, well, Bill, you've agreed to talk to the students at Oglethorpe University. These are young, intelligent men and women. What are you going to talk about? And I thought, well, you know, I could really get down in the weeds. I've been a student of the art and science of management all my adult life. So I said, you know, I could talk about high-level management theory. I could talk about cost accounting, standard cost variances, practical capacity analysis, resource-loaded CPMs. But then I thought, that would probably be akin to reading the phone book to you. So I said, you know, I was there. I was sitting right next to y'all. It was a long time ago, but I was sitting there. And what would I want to know if I was a student at Oglethorpe University? And there was this old Stormy Petrel up at the podium, had some feathers missing, but he had been out in the real world. He had faced the storms of life. He had fought the good fight. He had finished his course. He'd kept the faith, and he'd returned to Oglethorpe. And my answer was, I'd want to know his story. So I'm going to give you the super short version, just so I don't overextend my time, of my career path. I want to share with you a few very important traits that I think you should carry with you as you move out into the business world. Then I'm going to put my hard hat on and take questions. So here we go. Before I start, though, I would like to say, C.W. Mathews, some of the projects you would recognize that we've done, the closest one to us is the athletic track here at Oglethorpe University. I particularly remember building that because I don't think I ever got a check for it. But the bigger projects, what's that? Yeah, I heard that, Larry. Yeah. One of the bigger projects you'd recognize is the big yellow bridge in downtown Atlanta, 17th Street Bridge. We built that. It connected downtown Atlanta to Atlantic Station. And we also did the site work at Atlantic Station, and that was a very interesting project. It was 50 acres of prime real estate that is set for 40 years. And it is set for 40 years because it was highly contaminated. And with the help of the federal government, the developer, Jacoby Development, took the task on of creating Atlantic Station. While we were there, we were the site contractor. There was a two-story marble building on the site, and it had a bronze plaque on the front of it. And it was thanking the men and women of Atlantic Steel for their support of the war effort, and it was World War I. And then on the west end of the property, we discovered bomb shelters. And they had instructions in the bomb shelters what the various sirens meant. And that was in case the Germans ever made it to the East Coast, Atlantic Steel would have been a prime target. So there was a lot of history in that site. And they took a lot of the memorabilia, and there's supposed to be an exhibit area at Atlantic Station. I've never seen it, but some of you may have seen it, with all that in it. Some other projects you'd recognize, 31685 interchange. We did the 14th Street Bridge, William Street interchange. We did the 5th runway at the Atlanta Airport. That was a real challenging job. And if you've flown internationally, you know how the roadway comes up around the International Concourse. We did that project. And the unique thing about that project, we were there with 200-ton cranes in the air, 1 foot away from where they were erecting glass panels. So you're talking about having to be careful. And just the wind load from a tall crane will move it several feet. So It was really a dicey project. But that's a little bit about C.W. Mathews. So, what I want to do now, in a little bit of time, is give you the compressed version of my career path. When I graduated from high school, I did not come from a family of privilege. My father was in the Army. We had a good family. I spent most of my young years in either Japan, France, or Germany. Came back to the States when I was 16 years old. My brother, who's 7 years younger than me, was made in Japan. And he ended up, he was the good child. He ended up going into the ministry and still in there today. But when I graduated from high school, I had a problem. I know none of y'all have ever had this problem, but it was money. I wanted to go to Oglethorpe University. And with making a minimum wage back then, I figured I would be about 58 years old when I graduated because of how few courses I could take. But at that time, an interesting phenomenon was occurring in the country. IBM had introduced the IBM 360 computer, and it was causing businesses, up until that time, the computers were basically used by Fortune 500 companies and the government. But with the advent of that series of processors, mid-cap and smaller companies were moving into the computer age. And there was all kind of ads in the paper for computer programmers. So I decided, well, and I found this one advertisement for a school, technical school in Atlanta, unaccredited. But in less than 8 months, if you could pass the exit exam, well, you had an entrance exam, but it was like if you had 3 apples and ate one, how many would you have left? You know? But if you could pass the exit exam, you were guaranteed a job. And programmers were making a lot of money at that time because they were in, it was truly a transitional period in data processing. So I got to thinking, I've got $442 in the bank. And to this day, I remember that. I don't know why, because I've been known to spend more than that on a bottle of wine. But I remember that $442. And I said, I can take $200 of that, but I still need about $1,800 if I'm going to go to this school and cover my expenses and stuff. So I knew better than going to a bank and talking to a bank officer. They're going to turn me down. 19 years old, no collateral. They're not going to loan me $1,800. So I called the bank. And I asked to speak to the president. Well, naturally, I didn't get the president. I got the president's assistant. I told her, my name's Bill Hammack, and I'm a customer here at the bank, and I have a private matter that I need to discuss with the president. And it won't take but about 10 minutes. So she said, hold, please. And I was going, oh, this is it, man. This is a turning point in my life. Off to Vietnam I'm going, if this doesn't work. So she came back in a minute and said, can you be here at 10 o'clock in the morning? I don't know why I did this, but I said, let me check my schedule. So I said, yes, ma'am, I can make it at 10 o'clock in the morning. So that night I polished my loafers, creased my best khakis, put on my white shirt, my clip-on tie, and I got to the bank about 15 minutes before time, told them who I was, and they said, if you'll just have a seat over there in the waiting room, Mr. Johnson will be out to see you in a minute. And I was way too nervous to sit down. And one lesson in life, it's okay to be nervous, guys. Y'all are young. You're going to go out there and scare yourself. Being nervous is part of growing up. But I was walking back and forth, and I noticed that my shirt felt damp. And I stuck my hand under my jacket, my blue blazer, and I felt it. Man, I'm really sweating bad. I'm going to be soaking wet before Mr. Johnson comes out. I pull these 3 fingers out, and they were blue. And I went, oh no. And I looked down, and my white shirt had a great big blue circle on it where my fountain pen had come apart in my pocket. So I'm saying, well, life's over. This is it, you know. So I rushed over to the water fountain, and I was trying to clean my fingers off, and here comes Mr. Johnson. I said, oh, gosh. And I apologized. I said I had a little problem with my fountain pen. And he put me totally at ease. He said, I don't know why people think bankers should carry fountain pens, but after I've earned about 3 shirts, I stopped carrying them, and I relaxed after that. So I got my, he gave me the loan. And he gave me 2 years to pay it back, which I obviously did. And he said, do you know what a character loan is? I said, no, sir, I really don't. He said, you don't have any collateral. Your car is over 10 years old. We can't use it. So we're going to make you a character loan. And so that was a milestone in my career right there. So I took that money, went to the programming school, and true to form, they, at the end of the 8 months, and I went there at night. They had a daytime course and a night course. They had a 360 computer and all of what was called unit record equipment, which none of y'all are old enough to have probably ever seen, but they processed 80 column punch cards, because at that point in time, a mainframe computer, an IBM 360 model 22 computer, had 256K of CPU. Massive computer, big time computer. So in the old movies, when you see these tape drives running around, that's because a lot of the data had to be managed offline because the computer couldn't handle it, and it just selectively went out there and got it based on what the program was telling it. So after taking that, I took a job at the Service Bureau, and I was making the astounding amount of $10,000 a year. And for a 19-year-old kid, and I guess this would have been about 68, that was a lot of money. So I was there, I had arrived, and I was off to Oglethorpe. I made one strategic mistake. At 19 years old, you don't think you need to sleep. And I decided I was going to take the midnight shift at the Service Bureau. That way I could go to school in the morning, the afternoon, or at night. And I did that. Over about a 2.5-year period, I probably lost 10 pounds that I didn't have to lose. I'm thinking about going back now so I can get back down there, but it was how I started off my education. Then in 1971, my big break came. I was a rising senior at Oglethorpe, and a friend of mine called me from a CPA firm in Marietta, Georgia, Ed Cubbage. And he had taken a job with a company that was doing work for C.W. Mathews, and he said, you need to come talk to these folks. They've just bought their first computer. They've got a royal mess. Everything's manual now, and it's just right up your alley. So I did, and I liked the people. And what I particularly liked, I was talking to Bob Mathews, who was C.W. Mathews' son. Bob had just got back from Vietnam as a captain in the Army. He had a law degree from University of Georgia. Sharp guy. I really liked him right off the bat. And he said, Bill, we need somebody to come in and design the systems for C.W. Mathews Contracting Company. Can you do that? And I said, yes, sir, I can do that. So he hired me. And from that point forward, I was on my way. So it was I wish all of you could have that intellectual flexibility in your first job. Because literally, it was like a blank canvas. I was able to I made a whole lot of mistakes, but after I tried it and it didn't work, I'd try something else. But it was a great ride for me in that regard. It was that way my whole career at CWM. 1973, big year for me. I married my high school girlfriend, and I graduated from Oglethorpe. I can remember, though, they were putting us in alphabetical order. And they were calling out our names so we could sit down and, before the graduation. And graduation is a time for reflection. You'll see that when you graduate. And I was kind of recounting where I was in my life, what was going on. And as they called out the names of the other classes, 73 students, I realized really how few of them I actually knew because of the way I had to go to school. I had totally missed the social environment of a college education. And, to this day, one of the biggest regrets I have is not having lived on campus. I thought that would be the greatest thing in the world, to live on campus in an intellectual environment, share stories and study groups and drink a few beers maybe with the rest of you guys. But at the same time, I thought I was 26 years old. I had a great wife, same one today, 45 years later, and I had just been made an officer in the company, and I was making a very good salary. So I was on my way. From that point forward, for some reason, graduate school was out of the question. I was already way too busy at the company. But in I think it was 1977, they changed the experience requirements for CPA. And you could have 5 years in industry in addition to 2 years in public practice, or you could have 5 years in education, teaching. So I decided I was going to take the CPA exam. It took more studying than I realized, particularly in governmental accounting. I really didn't have any exposure at all to governmental accounting. But I managed to pass the exam, and in 1978, there were 3 of us in Georgia that were given our certificates having never practiced in public accounting, and they recognized us at the award ceremony. The rest of the 70s were pretty much a blur. It was all about cost accounting and computerization. I had hired some good staff. We were on our way. Then in early 1980, Bob Mathews calls me in and said, "Bill, I need you to take over the equipment division. I know you like that. We've been out in the field a lot together." I said, and it was not in my DNA to say no. So I said, "When do you want me to take it over?" He said, "In the morning." I said, "Okay." So 7 o'clock the next morning, I called a meeting in the shop. We had about 300, at that time the company had grown to size, we had probably 350 pieces of major construction equipment and another 100 pieces of support equipment. And there was 97 employees in the equipment division, mechanics, service truck people, tractor trailer drivers, to move the equipment around. And I looked out through that group, and I said, this is different from administrative people. So the first thing I had to do was learn about NASCAR, because they all love NASCAR. And they'd say, "Mr. Bill, what do you think about that number 24 car?" I said, "Well, I kind of like the 23 car better." So I had to learn. But great group of guys, hard-working people, and I really enjoyed that part of my job career. But there was one thing really wrong with the equipment division. It was decentralized. And C.W. Mathews had grown to the size we were spending $25, $30 million a year on equipment. And everybody was picking and choosing what they wanted at the division level. So I talked Bob into changing that, and I became the sole authority for buying equipment. I went to Yancey Brothers, who's a cat dealer, and told them my plan that I was going to centralize around Caterpillar equipment, which obviously made their day, but I needed 2 things: their solemn promise that nobody would buy equipment cheaper than C.W. Mathews, and secondly, that I had their best service rep. And service reps at Caterpillar are highly trained. They have schools in Peoria, Illinois, where they train on the equipment. So I interviewed the first guy. He was good, but the second guy I really liked. And I'd already decided he was going to be the guy to help me bring this equipment system up to speed. And I was walking him out the front door, and he asked me the question I got asked hundreds of times during my career. You're a Georgia Tech guy, aren't you? And I said, no, Bob. His name was Bob Peck. He said, I'm an Oglethorpe University guy. And he said, really? And he stuck out his hand, and he said, Bob Peck, Stormy Petrel, class of 69. So, you never know when you're going to run into another Stormy Petrel. And Bob Peck and I worked together for over 25 years. And he was a huge help to me in developing a fleet management system that I believe is second to none in the industry for C.W. Mathews. After that, everything was, I took on one division after another and don't have time to go through all of them. But I didn't realize I was vice president as early as Lynn said I was, but by the mid-90s, I was executive vice president and chief operating officer of the company and basically had control of everything operationally in the company. After that, I became the president of the company and retained that position from 2005 till the end of 2014 when I retired. Prior to my retirement, I went around and said bye to everybody. It was kind of a bittersweet experience for me, but I left a company. I left the largest contracting company in Georgia, a company that truly knew the cost of doing business, a company that cared about its employees, had a motivated workforce, and had a mentoring program from top to bottom. So I felt really good about what I had done. And at the same time, I had made myself independently wealthy. That wasn't a bad thing either. So I gave you the lightning version of that. What's the magic ingredient? What's the one thing above all else that will help you achieve success in your life's goals? One thing. Well, if you've got to go back to Calvin Coolidge, the 30th President of the United States. He was, in my opinion, he was the best executive that ever sat in the Oval Office. He was there from about 1923 to 1928 or 9. During his term, he not only had a budget, he balanced the budget every year. He streamlined the tax code, he streamlined the bureaucracy, and when he left, he had reduced the federal deficit from the burden of World War I by 20%. And he was respected on both sides of the aisle. So he was asked, what's the one thing, Mr. Coolidge, that allowed you to ascend to the highest office in the land? The one thing, above all other, one attribute. And what he said was, and it surprised a lot of people, he said it's persistence. He said nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Unsuccessful men with talent are commonplace. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. And there's a lot of good news in that for the young men and women sitting here at Oglethorpe today. You don't have to be the most talented person in the room to reach your life's goals, nor do you have to be the smartest or the most educated, but you've got to have that persistence and determination, that fire in your belly. So when life knocks you down, and some of you it'll knock down harder than others, you've got the strength to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and move forward to achieve your life's goals. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The second point I'd like to make is about the total concept of management. There's a lot of misconceptions, particularly on TV, about what a manager does. When he gets up and screams at somebody and says, "You're fired." A good manager, a good executive, doesn't do that. It takes a good manager. First of all, anybody in authority can terminate a subordinate. It's a very simple thing. But it takes a good manager, a good executive, to develop that employee. And one of the most gratifying things you'll have in your careers, if you do end up in a management role, is the development of the people under you, the mentoring. So just remember that you're dealing with people, and always give them clear goals with clear expectations. If they don't meet those goals, you need to talk to them, you need to ask them what the problem is, and listen very carefully, because they're going to give you one or two answers. "I'm not going to do this," or "I don't know how to do this." And if it's the second answer, then as a good manager, good executive, you need to get them help. You need to put them in a mentoring program. You need to get them with somebody that can train them if they've got the work ethic. If it's the first answer that "I just don't want to do this," then they need to go work somewhere else. So that's the two main points I wanted to make in regards to my career path. What about life after Oglethorpe? When you drive out the front gates with that diploma in hand, what's the world going to be looking for? Well, first of all, you only have one chance to make a first impression. So if you're going for a job interview, bring your A game, because very few people get a second chance. And there are some exceptions to that. When I was in my first year of employment at C.W. Mathews, I was terribly understaffed. I had clerical people, but I didn't have a professional accountant. So I was interviewing for one. Interviewing is not an easy thing to do. It takes practice and skill. So I was nervous. And that made the people I was interviewing nervous. And this one fellow by the name of George French came in. I didn't think he was the right person. But the next day they called me from the front and said, "Your interview is here." And I didn't know I had an interview, so I went back out front. George French. The employment agency had accidentally sent him back to our company rather than another company. And he came in my office and said, "I guess they're going to keep sending me back till you hire me." And we both laughed. And it broke the tension, and I had a good discussion with him, and he kind of opened up, and he worked there the rest of his life. So sometimes you do get a second chance at a first impression. But when you go out the front door, your communication skills are going to be on the stage, both verbal and written. The best advice ever given to a public speaker was Mark Twain. Samuel Clemens was his name, but his pen name was Mark Twain. He said, "Be sincere, be brief, and be seated." And that's the same way with your written communication. Your boss asks for a report, be as concise and as short as possible. The next one you might not think about that much, but it's going to get noticed right away, particularly by senior management. All well-run companies have a sense of urgency about them. Every one of them. If it's a well-run company, I promise you, it has a sense of urgency about it. And you need to have that in your work ethic. And it will be noticed, because time is money, and timely decision-making is the key to the success of any good, well-run business. So demonstrate that sense of urgency. Last thing I'll say, and this is getting a lot of discussion these days in business journals and the Wall Street Journal, and it comes under the general heading of emotional intelligence. And there was a report I read the other day. A psychologist was saying that candidates or high-level school candidates, Harvard, Yale, 4.0 averages, are failing in the workplace because of lack of emotional intelligence, which is another way of saying the people skills. And this psychologist was saying part of it is due to the technological revolution you guys have been right in the middle of. You text and you tweet and you do all that, but when you get out there, you're going to be dealing with other people, differing opinions, and your emotional intelligence is going to be critical to your advancement through the management ranks. And in a subset of that, which is something, it's my pet characteristic, is intellectual honesty. And what I mean by that is, y'all are smart people. You're going to get in, you're going to go to work for a company, and it won't take you long to figure out what that corporate culture of that company is. And your boss comes in and says, I've got an idea, what do you think about it? And if you filter your answer through what you think he wants to hear, that's not intellectual honesty. But be very careful, because I don't want one of y'all calling me in a couple of years and saying, well, thank you a lot, Bill. I was really intellectually honest to my boss, and I told him that was the dumbest damn thing I'd ever heard in my life, and he fired me. You have to have intellectual honesty, but you have to have it with tact. But the higher up you go in management, it's the hardest thing to find. It's the hardest thing to find. In my position as president, when I said something, everybody thought, oh, that's the greatest idea in the world. I said, no, it's not. There's got to be something wrong with this. And I encouraged constructive criticism. It's just a healthy environment. So, intellectual honesty. So I've talked a lot so far about climbing the corporate ladder, traits that you're going to have out in the real world. But does that mean everybody needs to be in management, regardless of your major? No, absolutely not, to be successful in life. You know what your life goals are, or at least some of them at this point. So everyone doesn't need to be in management. But if you take it upon yourself to climb that corporate ladder, just remember this: to those that much is given, much is expected. And the higher you go up that ladder, a lot of people think it's inverse. The higher you go up that ladder, the more difficult it gets. So, as Socrates would say, know thyself when you start out in that career path. With that, I have just a couple of brief closing remarks. Y'all don't look that mean, so I'm going to leave my hard hat right here. And Lynn, is it time for questions?
Ready for questions?
Don't be bashful.
Jim?
We need a taller microphone.
I'm ruining it for everybody else. My name is Jim Miles. I'm a adult student here. In my career, I found that when I'm mentoring future leaders, the hardest discussions and the most learning came from failure and managing failure. So I got a two-part question, so you might want to get your hard hat ready. It's real simple. The first part is, can you speak a little bit about what does failure mean to you and how it's kind of permeated your career? And then maybe give an example of maybe a failure that was transformed your career or maybe your thought process.
That's a good question. Risk-taking is something that was always in my DNA. I wasn't afraid to make a mistake. Tom Peters, who wrote In Search of Excellence, gives a great example of being afraid to be wrong. And he drew two targets. And on the first target, for bow and arrow, it said, ready, aim, 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 aim. Never fired the bow. They were afraid they were going to miss this bullseye. The second target said, ready, fire, aim. And he said, that's the side you want to be on. Don't be afraid to fail the first time. You learn from your mistakes, you correct them, and you move forward. But that's a great question.
Hi, Mr. Hammack. I'm
Hey.
Karina Barreto. I want to thank you again for being here and sharing your story
I
for all of
appreciate
us.
being here.
So my question to you is, from your perspective as the former president of a major construction company, do you think that the glass ceiling still exists in 2017?
Okay, hard hat time. That is a very fair and very good question. I think there's some good news to that and some not so good news. I think there still is, in segments of the business community, glass ceilings, but I don't think they're near as prevalent as they were 20 or 30 years ago. Is it easier for a man to exceed in the business world than a woman? In a lot of industries, the answer, unfortunately, is still yes. But one of the greatest quotes I ever heard about women's perseverance came from Ginger Rogers, which most of y'all don't have a clue who that is. But Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, this was before my time, were ballroom dancers back in the late 30s, early 40s. And Fred Astaire and Ginger were being interviewed after an event, camera rolling, and she was getting a little miffed because all the questions were going to Fred Astaire, the great ballroom dancer. So finally, one of the reporters said, Ginger, what's it like dancing with the greatest ballroom dancer of all times? And by this time, she was highly aggravated. She said, well, it is true Fred Astaire is a good ballroom dancer, one of the greatest maybe, but don't forget this. I do everything Fred Astaire does, only backwards and in high heel shoes. And so it's still a little more difficult out there, but you're seeing women executives rise in all levels. There's one other, this was a pet passion of mine in the contracting business, was to try to develop particularly inner city young women and attract them into heavy highway construction, because it's not a man's world anymore. It's not, a macho thing. Everything's electronics over hydraulics, like playing a game. And these women could make $20 an hour sitting in a bulldozer versus minimum wage flipping hamburgers. So I was involved in a federal program to attract more young women into that area. But the only other thing that I think is in effect today, and it's a social issue, and the best example I can give you is the lady that was in charge of our cost accounting department's name was Teresa. Sharp young woman, was a CPA and did a great job. And I called her in one day and said, Teresa, the company's grown to the size, we need a controller. And I want to offer you that job. And she said, I'm going to have to talk to my husband. This is a big step for us. I'll get back with you tomorrow. I said, that's fine, take your time, and I certainly understand that. And I said, just remember, the next step up from that is vice president. And I could tell when she came in the next afternoon it wasn't going to be good. And what she said was, we're trying to have our first child. And we've decided that until we want to have 2 children, until the children are school age, I'm going to stay at home. And once they get in school, then I'm going to return to the workplace. I think that scenario plays out a lot in the world today. I think it's changing some. But what happens then is, during a critical part of a young person's career, they're missing out. They're missing the advancement opportunities. So that's another reason for that. But I have great respect for women and your abilities. As my wife would tell me, there's nothing I do that she can't do better. I understand that, but thank you for the question.
Another question?
Y'all are easy. Well, I'll give y'all one. I've been reading it's amazing the number of articles that have been written about technology and artificial intelligence. And everything that I read, and the preeminent experts, Gerd Linhard, which is, he's considered a futurist, he said that he believes, and he's a consultant in Fortune 500, that in the next 20 years, the amount of technology in the world will advance more than the last 300 years. That's right in y'all's wheelhouse. That's, and his concern was, will the social and economic ramifications of that be able to control the exponential advance of technology that's out there? And y'all are going to face that. And it's already here. I'll give you a real quick example. I look for stuff like this. I don't know. We were going to our home on the coast, and we stopped about halfway down so our white Labrador retriever can do her stuff down at a Wendys. And we've been doing this for a good while. They've gotten to know me, and I speak to all of them. So I go inside, get my hamburger, take it out to the car, order Bailey's, and I go to the counter, so I want like 2 Diet Cokes to go. And the manager, because he's got on the dress shirt with the Wendys on it, not the golf shirt, he hands me 2 cups stuck together. I look around, no ice, no drink, no top, no straw. He said, we have a new drink kiosk, state of the art. It tells us what everybody likes to drink, what time of day they like to order their drinks, and it gives us a great real-time inventory. And I'm thinking, and I bet you don't have a drink person behind the counter for that anymore. He said, oh, yeah, no, we don't need a person. So I got back to the car. That's just one little example. And I thought, okay, I'm riding down 16, the most boring drive in the world. And I'm thinking, how many Wendys are there in the United States? And I'm thinking, okay, East Coast, West Coast. And I didn't even come close. We got to our home in Palmetto Bluff, and I did what you guys do a lot better. I Googled it. 6,100 Wendys. So in one fell swoop, with 2 shifts, 12,200 people lost their job. That's occurring every day in technology. And people in robotics will tell you, well, no, you don't understand. Robotics are here to assist the humans, not replace them. But when you look at the cost of an employee, I had this somewhere. Here's what you have with robotics. You have no overtime wages, no payroll taxes, no health insurance, no dependent coverage, no sick pay, no vacation pay, no maternity leave, no pension plan expense or bonuses. So the economics of robotics is showing up everywhere, and it's something that there's going to have to be some balance to. Bill Gates, in a speech he gave recently, suggested that we should tax robotics. And his reason was simple: to slow it down, to let the human issues surrounding robotics catch up with the technology. But y'all are going to be faced with that. This same futurist said that in 30 years, there will be, and I don't believe this, but he said in 30 years, there'll be nothing that man can do that artificial intelligence can't do better. That's right in y'all's wheelhouse. This is something y'all are going to have to address as young men and women going out in the world. And every one of you, if you think about it, can think of the jobs that have been eliminated subtly, but it's happening everywhere. So I rambled on with that answer, I actually asked a question. So, good answer, Bill.
All right, my name is Malik Willis. Basically, my question for you is, I know you donated a large sum of money to actually the business department, and I wanted to know what is your vision for that money towards the school?
Here goes the hard head again. You know, it's a work in progress. That's a good question. I would go back to what I said at the beginning. I believe in young people. I believe in your energy, your enthusiasm, your intellect, and your inclusiveness. And, you know, it's a way I think I can help. And President Shaw says, yes, you can help a lot. So it's a work in progress. There's gonna be a dean of the business school. I would love to see at some point in the future, and Larry and I haven't talked about this a whole lot, I'd love to have a graduate school of business here. I really would. So those of you that want to pursue a graduate level degree could do it. And, you know, the other day I thought, I called Larry and I said, Larry, you know, I want to take $5 million of my gifts and I want to move it to the arts and humanities, because that's really part of what Oglethorpe's about, is the liberal arts experience. So he thought that was a good idea and said he'd let me do it. So, but thank you for the question. That was a great question.
Other questions? Sure. That's all. Okay, we're going to take a moment and introduce Lynch, one of our OU Board of Trustee members, because she has a few words she would like to say.
Thank you, Lynn. As Lynn said, I'm Belle Turner Lynch. I'm a graduate of Oglethorpe, the class of 1961. So I have you by a few years, Bill. My relationship with Oglethorpe began in 1983 when I was asked to join the Board of Trustees. I have the dubious distinction today of being the chronologically oldest trustee, as well as the trustee who has served the longest. And there have been many highs and lows along this 34-year path. Barbara asked me to talk about a few of those. The lows have been when we as a university had to compromise our high academic standards in order to have enough students to keep the doors open. When there was such unrest among our faculty, largely due to being underpaid and overworked. And a provost whose communication was inadequate in bridging understanding between faculty and senior management. And a trustee board whose oversight was not focused on making sure that the university was run as a business. Let's balance these negatives with some positives. There's been tremendous growth in trustee engagement with emerging young graduates in leadership positions. Our provost excels in communications. The respect that Oglethorpe has earned in the Atlanta business community, and most importantly, the hiring of Larry Shaw as our 16th president, and his 12 years as our leader. He has challenged all of us, trustees, faculty, and staff, to be more and to do more than we ever thought was possible. Why do we, faculty, staff, and trustees, do what we do? And the answer for me is that Oglethorpe is family. Together we are a unit who closely work together because we can accomplish more working as a group. We are a team. Specifically, what is my reason for being a dedicated Oglethorpe alumna? I believe that education is one of the strongest influences on an individual's character. I am grateful to my alma mater for my broad educational background. Oglethorpe instilled in me the value of being a lifelong learner. And for that reason, I attempt to pay it back, pay it forward for this next generation of students. Many of you have recently learned of Mr. Hammack's gift that will establish the Hammack School of Business in the new Cousins Center for Science and Innovation. On behalf of the trustees, faculty, and staff of this university, thank you, Bill Hammack, for your generous gift to Oglethorpe. I want to assure you we will use it wisely and well. You and I and others share a deep appreciation of our college education, and I personally look forward to many years of friendship with you. Thank you.
And finally, but of course not least, Dr. Shaw.
So just to close it out. So first of all, thank you, high and low, for being here. What a terrific crowd. Thank you, Bill, for those remarks. Oglethorpe really has this history of alumni who care about this place and who give back in extraordinary ways, in ways that those of you who are sitting here as students can't imagine, but you will imagine when you get older. We have the Lynch Campus Center, thanks to Bell and so many trustees. And now we will have, I'm going to get this right, so Mr. Hammack's goes by Q. William Hammack Jr. So we will have the Q. William Hammack Jr. School of Business. That is a big name, but just like the Lynch Campus Center is known by, so we've already come up with a Q school. So now we'll have to, I don't know whether can we get away with not putting all those letters on a building, or we have to put the whole, we got the whole name on there, right? And the check is still in the mail, so it is coming. But Bill is sort of following that wonderful tradition of giving back to this place and, you know, stepping it up 50 notches. So we could not be more grateful to you and your wife Diane, sitting next to the Rikard family that's just got this long tradition of giving, many trustees in the room. So it's a good day for us, and a lot of good lessons imparted. So we're going to have, there's a little reception, which was going to be outside, but it's too darn hot, so I think it's there. We have a little gift. It looks like it would be like a baby shower, but I don't. That's not happening. But I'm wearing you. Surprise! Little golf paraphernalia. We know you're a golfer. Welcome to the Q
School. Okay.
So
Thank you. Thank all of you.